to the people that are joining us from around the world.
Yes.
We do have quite a bit of international audience, so God knows what time it is for some people listening here. If it's like if it's after midnight, just put it in the chat. I'm curious if you're actually
Yeah.
It's been amazing looking at the optics on our socials to see where people are tuning in from. It's really mind blowing.
From around the world.
Colombia, Hungary.
We do have.
It's great.
I started integrating good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to everyone who is watching with us.
We have a big Hungarian presence. I need to learn to say good morning or good evening.
Okay. I think we're good.
Looks like we're on YouTube. Looks like we're rocking and rolling. Go ahead and kick things off for everyone who's joining us and has been sticking with us from the beginning. Thank you and welcome back to anyone who's joining us for the first time. We are thankful for you to be a part of this with us. Yeah, we've made it to our 17th webinar of Tour Management 101. I can't believe we've made it this far, but man, we are still trucking. So I'm excited to kick this one off. Production is a really big, important step in being a tour manager. And yeah, so we're gonna dive right into it. So Henry, you wanna kick us off and we'll get this thing started.
Thanks, Mark. So it's common that newer tour managers with little technical experience quickly get in over their heads when they find out that a big part of their job is to communicate all of the production needs for that show. It's also the common progression for up and coming acts to start taking small production elements like lighting, staging, or a backdrop. So that's when the tour manager starts being a production manager and has to keep up with wearing two hats. In Production 101, we're going to teach you that you don't need to have a technical background. You just need to know how to manage it. So our special guests are no strangers to the stage today. We have Karen Shaviv, production manager with the Fox Theater in Boulder, Colorado, and Zito Zito, production manager for acts like Ariana Grande and Josh Groban. So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, all right. Zito, let's just jump into it. You know, everybody has a different approach when it comes to a show. So I'm curious to know what your step one is like.
Yeah, you know, this is my 21st year touring, and you know, while at this stage, you know, I've worked for a lot of international acts. I started out just like everybody else. I years and years ago played in a band, and then I started working for a small band. I didn't know what I was doing. They hired me to be their audio guy, and I found out I was their tour manager and production manager and was responsible for everything. And so I had to learn as I go and learn as I went. And over the course of my career, I've developed sort of systems and things that work for me. There's no right way necessarily. There's no you have to do it this way. But there are a lot of things that I've learned that I've adopted that work for me, and it's kind of the basic principles that I work off of when I'm setting up a tour and getting started. And I use those same sort of guidelines, whether it's you know, a smaller club act, shed level act, or an arena act. I kind of start and build everything the same way. So I'm going to share a couple of things, sort of how I approach things, and you know, some of this may be applicable to some of the folks out there. Yeah, and these are sort of the things that keep checks in place for me. So I'm making sure that I kind of take the same thing and avoid mistakes and missing things along the way.
Great.
So I'm going to share here what I kind of start with when I first get hired for a tour. First, get the phone call. I've got the routing. They've hired me. The very first thing I do is I start to build what I call my production grid. And I'm going to share this. You have to enable it so I could share.
Go ahead. Should be good now.
Okay. Here we go. So I'm sharing with you what I call my production grid. And essentially, this is the way that I lay out the tour any tour when I start. I'm going to show you two kind of different examples of it. And what this does for me is it puts everything into kind of one spreadsheet where I can look at an overview of the entire tour, the dates and the venues, and kind of some broad points that I'm trying to address with the tour, so that as we are going through the planning process, I have this as a reference. Anybody that's toured with me or been on the road with me knows that this screen here is always on. I always have it. It's usually on a secondary screen off to my right. I'm always kind of looking at this and referencing with it. So the minute that I get hired, I start going and putting in this information into my grid. And I'll go back through kind of one of the cool things is as you're building this information, I am a hoarder of information. I think information is power. And so I save everything. I always save every spec I have on the venues and all the information. And these grids here, a lot of this information I'll sort of cut and paste from previous tours. So as I've been through a venue, I already have this stuff on file. Again, when I get hired, one of the very first things that I do when I'm building this grid is get all the contact information for the venue, reach out to them. And even if it's a couple of months ahead, just say, hey, we're coming up to your venue in a couple of months. Do you have an updated tech packet for the venue, just so I can have it on file? And I'll touch base with you as we get closer. So I'll take all that information and I'll put it into here. And a couple of things is, a lot of this information will stay the same. It's pertinent whether I'm doing a club tour here or an arena tour. A lot of this is the stuff that I need to know. And then some of it is geared a little bit towards some of it's going to be a little bit geared towards the type of venue that we're doing. So I always set up kind of color coding so I can easily see the shows are in dark gray, and I'll start laying them out by date and the amount of shows. This was for the Steve Aoki club tour that we did this spring, or I should say started doing before the COVID shut us down. And this was the stuff that was really important for me as we were planning here. So I start to go through, I lay out the mileage. I wanted to know the trim information for the show, how much space we had from the stage to the rigging, and some rigging notes, power, stage dimensions, the number of docks that were available, bullet points on what the load-in path was like, parking, some general notes, and even things like showers. I put this in here. If it's on an arena tour, that's not important. Almost all the venues have adequate showers, but for something like this, as I'm planning, I want to know if there's showers there and I need to get shower rooms. So I kind of lay this all out into my grid. And by having this here and sort of updating it as we go, that helps me in having information available as we start planning the tour to know that what we can do and what we can't do production-wise. On this tour, we started out with a design that the designer had worked with the artist on, and had a lot of flown elements. And so one of the things that, by having this ready, as soon as I saw the design come through, I said, hey, folks, everybody should be aware that, of all these venues that we're doing here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them have no available rigging. So we're not going to be able to hang the show. So that allows me to kind of be able to point some things out to the designer and to the team as they're planning, to help them, make mistakes as we go, so there's no surprises. And again, this is all information that's that I gleaned from tech packets from previous times there, making notes, as I went through the venue. And you could see here, I'll go to a larger scale tour. And this is my production grid for an arena tour. And it's laid out the same way. I don't care about some of the details there as far as, if there's showers and things like that. I know that the arenas have showers, and some of those other things aren't pertinent to us, but trim is, rigging notes. For an arena tour, I wanted to know if they had the ice down, because it changes how I advance the show if they've got ice down on the floor and those types of things. So again, the things that work for me is just having this in one big broad document that I can look at, that I can reference. And I like to highlight and flag things that need to be of note or concern as I go. And so this is kind of my starting point and jumping off point in things that I can do before there's a design, before we work through all the logistics of it, laying it out and organizing the information in a way that it's, quickly accessible for me. And I would highly encourage you folks to kind of come up with their own system, but something along this lines that allows you to have the information at hand to be able to quickly address it. Yesterday in our call, one of the things that I had sort of talked about was this tour I was doing this summer. They wanted to carry pyro. And so as I built the grid here, I had a section on pyro that might not be applicable for your tour, but because I had that in there and I had already done my homework on which venues could and couldn't do pyro, when the conversation came up, was able to quickly reference that and say, hey, we have 56 shows here. Of the 56 shows, 17 don't allow any pyro. So is this something we want to do? Is this something that you want to spend money on if you can't do it in 17 of the shows? So it's really been beneficial for me. And this is kind of always a work in progress, things I update on how I do the information. But like I said, whether it's a club tour, a shed tour, an arena tour, I start them all the same way, the information the same way.
This is great. For our students that have been with us since the beginning, you may recognize a sheet like this from episode 3, I think, in building the tour. We showed a very similar sheet in how we advance for the venue of all the typical things like shower, parking, like to do advanced catering, hospitality. And so it's the same mentality and process for production needs. And I mean, so much. I learned so much from the tour just by seeing that. Like there's even beyond the technical stuff, like parking. Like I saw at Stage AE, you knew that you had parking on the day off, and and that makes a big difference. You can have to pay for it, but and that was just step 1, right? Is to build this out. It almost looks like something that you would have completed by the end, but to have this done ahead of time, like you said, can save thousands of dollars in wasted time and production elements. And then you can see whether or not you're going to be in an A, B, or C rig day. And I mean, this is amazing. How long did, say for like the leg 1 club tour, how long does it take you to put this sheet together?
Well, it's always a bit of a work in progress. I'm always, adjusting as I go. But I'll spend the first week putting this together, and I also build a Dropbox folder that looks very similar to this. That is called Show Info, and there's a folder for each date, and then within each date, I'll start putting in all the relevant information, parking maps, and any tech files from the venue, so that again I have quick access to the information and just always have it at my fingertips.
I wanted to just make a reference point and point out a redundancy that we keep experiencing as we're hitting different points. The one thing that everyone can notice is that we all have a way where we physically organize the way that the tour is going to work. And you will see, if you've been consistently watching, that every single guest and all of us on the panel have each shared how we all organize ourselves out of the door. And it generally has to do with something that looks like a grid like this in some way where we're keeping information. And some of us use Master Tour as a live and online way to do that. And some of us keep advanced grids, but there's something very important for everyone to understand about how when you take your process and you put it into a tactile action as you are entering the data, any way you do it, whether it's Master Tour or your own grid, or if you're keeping it on paper, the action of getting that thought in your brain out through your hands into something consistently helps you to get to know your tour more organically. Zito knows that he's got 17 of these places because he's been working in that same place over and over. So you become one with your tour. Yeah. True story though, you organically, in a very organic way, it's kind of in the fibers, and you know that you're going to see that yellow knob this number of times on the page, and you put yours in for yourself to remember things. So this organizational stuff is super important, and it's something that will carry you through every single other thing that you do in your life, whether it's production or ticketing or advancing or logistics for a supermarket or a grocery store or a furniture store, whatever it is, these types of skills are very important to have and stay with you.
Yeah.
Keep going. Sorry.
Well, you know what? Like, looking at the club run, since we're going back to step one, right? Like we figured out what the physical limitations are in these buildings, right? But did you see that rigging column? I mean, you had heights of like trims of 16 feet, 60 feet. Like that was all over the place. And so if you're at step one and you're going to the designer with this information, hopefully they see that like, wow, we are all over the place when it comes to our rigging capabilities on this tour. And some, you're just going to have to build it from the ground up instead of flying it. So that says a lot to a designer, or to sometimes there isn't a designer, and it's just sort of the band telling you what you want, and you have to decipher that information, right?
Yeah, and keeping I've been through these venues dozens and dozens and dozens of times, but I only have a finite amount of space available in my head. And so I kind of document to the extreme, which is why I do the grids. No matter how many times I go through a venue, there may be something that I didn't remember from last time, or one of the things that I talk about a lot is every show has as you're building the show, has sort of its own thing that's really important to it. There's always kind of that one element of the show that is unique or different or poses a specific challenge. And so what might be an issue going through this time, where let's say, your show revolves around carrying confetti, right? So the only thing that the band cares about is having this confetti shot. So that might be the thing that's really important to know, which of the venues you can do confetti and the cost of the cleanup. On the Steve Aoki tour, what was really important for the design of that show were these gigantic inflatable products. And they were 14 feet tall and had to be flown from the grid. So that involved, other information that was pertinent. They didn't care if, the confetti happened or whatever, but that had to happen every day. So that was a thing that was flagged. And so by keeping all that information at hand in that grid, I can immediately find the venues that I need to go to in it, maybe and spend some extra time going through those details with in advance and work through them. And it didn't matter on another tour, but it matters here. So I try to document that and have everything on hand so that I can, quickly try to be able to answer questions and address problems as they arise.
That's such an an A-level production almost going on into a club level. So let's break it down into some of the early, like a simpler package. So some of the more common my first production element packages that go out are a floor lighting package, which is lights that literally just sit on the floor. Nothing is being hung from a truss or from the ceiling. And then staging, maybe some risers, right? Or a small audio package. Confetti is an early
sure. I think one of the first thing that any artist usually brings, I think the first element that folks bring along is going to be their backline, the instruments and equipment that they need. And I always say, if there's something that's absolutely your show can't happen without, we have to have this thing, our guitar player has to play through this amp or whatever it is, the responsibility needs to be on you, not on others to provide that. If there's something that's so integral to your show, your playback rig or your this specific drum that just cannot happen without it, you cannot put that responsibility on others. So you should be carrying it at that point. And it kind of starts out from there. I think the first step for 95% of the artists is carrying their backline, the instruments that they're playing on the stage. From there, I think a lot of folks gear up to carrying an audio package, carrying your soundboards, your front house and or monitor boards. And, we talked about this a little bit in our call yesterday, but it's my personal feeling that when an artist steps up, that's kind of the next step. You go from carrying your band gear and you're maybe going into clubs or theaters that have in-house audio and have some of that stuff already there, and you use it. And the next step is, hey, we want consistency on a daily basis. So we're going to start carrying our our audio console. And when that happens, usually that at that step is where you're kind of like, all right, maybe we need to have an audio tech. We need to have somebody that's responsible for the equipment that can operate for the band. A lot of bands will start carrying a sound engineer before the equipment so that they have someone that's, can have some consistency on a daily basis. A lot of acts, like you mentioned, carry confetti cannons, I don't know why. They're messy and a disaster and probably one of my all-time least favorite things. But, that's a popular thing. Backdrops, that's a big one. And even that, like, it sort of goes into the same thing. If your band says, hey, we want to carry a backdrop, we want to have a, big picture of Stonehenge behind us, you need to be able to say, well, okay, that's great. So we're playing these 23 shows, and all of these stages are only 18 feet to 24 feet wide and maybe only 16 feet to 19 feet of trim. So, okay, well, we're not going to get a 40 by 20 backdrop. It's not going to fit anywhere. So you can reference and go to the artist or management and say, hey, we shouldn't be paying to carry this big backdrop. We can't hang it anywhere. So let's go for something smaller. Let's make sure that it's appropriate for the venues that we're playing.
That's very true.
That happens so many times where a band will, over the years, a band gets a backdrop thinking it's going to fit up this stage, arena-sized stage, and then they go into a club and, their name is missing 2 of the letters off of each side because it's way too big. It's happened so many times. Like, what do we do? And it's like, get another one, start over. There's not much you can do if that's the case, or wait until you get to bigger venues. But yeah, I've seen it happen so many times.
Or I wanted to just put more emphasis on it and just referencing back to our advancing webinar, the importance of doing your research. Don't always wait until the advance. Like you can get these tech packs on their website. You can get in touch with your agent. There's ways for you to do your research going into these tours to build out these grids and prepare your production for that designer phase. So I just wanted to put emphasis on that for a new tour manager that's going into the first tour.
Yeah,
true. But let's go back a step to what Zito was saying, that the first steps are commonly backline and audio. So that's 95% of the acts are starting there. But you know what? 100% of acts, the first thing they commonly need is what a stage plot and input list. Every act needs it. It's the most basic thing that you can kind of just hand to the local engineers and get by. And it's a universal language of what your show is. So I was just going to quickly share what an example of a stage plot and input list. This is for, do you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay, so some no-name band. This is what a really basic stage plot would look like. We can see that they have a keyboard set up, guitars on stage right, drummer sits stage left with the bass player by the drums, lead singer. I can see asked for a straight stand, probably has a pedal board or something down here that needs power. Like anything that needs to go down on the stage, you just draw it and number it. And so then it goes along with a input list. So who wants to give me some 101 vocabulary? Can someone define an input list for me?
Yeah, I used to be an audio guy. I can talk about this.
We try to cover 101 terminology as well, and that maybe
audio-ish. I tell everybody I'm retired. Basically, when you're coming in, if you're not carrying a sound engineer, you're not carrying any equipment, the club, venue, arena, whatever it is, needs to be prepared so that they know what your needs are, right? So you're telling them what the instrumentation is that you're bringing and listing out in an articulate way, what it's going to be. We're carrying a 5-piece drum kit. We have right here, you can see there's an electronic drum kit, and we've got a click track, some bass, guitar, keyboards, and that lets them and lets their audio team be prepared for knowing exactly what you're bringing, what needs to be set up on the consoles. And, don't be overwhelmed by this. A lot of folks, this isn't their strong suit. If you're a first-time tour manager, this may be totally foreign to you. Don't be afraid to ask somebody else to help you put one together so that you can make sure you're sharing the information that you need to need to, share. And yeah, that's great. I see one of our comments here, stage plots and input lists should have dates and version numbers. Absolutely. Very important.
Number on there. And, I shared an embarrassing story the other day that I think one of my first stage plots input lists I was trying to create when I was coming up, I didn't know that the column, it had to go in order that in the way that you would list it on a console. And so I did it alphabetically. And like, it's such a simple thing. It's so silly now to think about it, and that I simply just asked an audio person, like, help me. I'm trying to make this input list. How do you do it? And they helped me and corrected the mics and put in the little notes about what type of stands you need. And then, like you said, always put a contact number and then a date and version is
because they will always be wrong. Like the venues are getting these primarily from the agents who send them along with the contracts, and they are always wrong without exception. So just assume that you should send the most current updated stage plot and input list during your advanced process, and your venue PM will be so grateful.
And I always tell my agents with any artist that I work with, don't send anything.
Don't send it at all.
Whatever you have, I can assure you is outdated. Let information come from me so that it's accurate. And when I send information to the promoter or local production rep, the first thing I do is say, hey, anything you've gotten, trying to find, sorry, I'm screwing this up here. Anything you've gotten prior to from anybody else other than me is not accurate. So work off of this. I might having a hard time finding this plot here. So here's another super simple example of a stage plot and an input list kind of all combined in one. This was just something that was thrown together quickly for an acoustic performance. Achieves the same thing. Tells everybody what the instruments are, where they're at on the stage, and kind of the layout of it. Super simple, can put it together really quickly and just, lets folks know this is what we're doing so that when we walk in, they have a general idea of what it is and how to be prepared. But don't be afraid to ask somebody to help you do that and set.
To create stage plots, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I've done it in Word. You can do it on Google Sketch. There's Stage Plot Pro is a really easy program.
On a piece of paper. I mean, it ultimately it's the information that's important. It's really not the not the format that it's necessarily presented in. Just get them the information.
Yeah. And we've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. Make sure it always has the artist's name on it, especially when you go into festivals, because that stage manager might be looking at 12 artists' stage plots and input lists. And I guarantee you, he doesn't have the time to go searching for which one he's looking at if it doesn't have the name there and then. That's only going to hurt your production when you arrive.
Yeah. And include current contact information for whoever they should contact if need be, because it gets separated all the time. So if a sound guy ends up just with the input list, he knows who to call.
Zito, I think that may have been the first page before the stage plot and input list. Is that your advanced sheet?
Yeah, I was going to come to that at the end. I jumped out of order.
Oh, no worries. Because I was going to go to that. Well, let's go back a step, and like we're going to cover the step of calling vendors for the first time. Because for a lot of our students, or if you're at that step and or even if you're carrying some audio, but you're calling a vendor for some lighting, that's not something that anybody typically owns. So talk to our students about that first step of calling a vendor and how you go about ordering your first ground lighting package. Yeah.
One important thing that I want to touch on with vendors here, I'll make this brief. My view of vendors are partners. They are partners in the tour. So that is how I treat my relationships with vendors, whether it's a lighting vendor, a sound vendor, special effects. When I'm relying on them to provide a service for us, but we're entering into this as a partnership. So my responsibility is to be able to communicate clearly with them, to work with them, and they come to me with solutions on how to solve whatever the issues are with that we might be having with production, or to give creative solutions on how we can achieve something. So I think that's very integral to keep in mind as you move on in your career, that it's not you versus the versus the vendor. You shouldn't be trying to undermine them. You want to set them up for success. And sometimes we're handed a vendor, maybe management has said, you're going to use this company, or you have to work with these folks, and they might not be your first choice. But at that point, you're in it together, right? So you want to do everything you can to set that vendor up for success and build that partnership. So that is really important to me. It's something that served me really well in my career, is building these relationships with vendors. And I have preferred vendors for sure, but I might work with one lighting vendor on this tour and a different one on another tour for whatever reason. And so I try to maintain my relationships with all of those folks. I think when I always try to approach a vendor with here's what I'm trying to achieve. If you don't know who to reach out to, let's say you need an audio package for the first time, ask some of your other colleagues, some of your other touring friends, say, hey, who have you worked with? What are the vendors that you would recommend? And they'll put you in touch with folks. And I would always recommend reaching out to a couple of vendors at the beginning. When I'm reaching out to vendors and bidding out a tour, I always send everybody the exact same information. I make sure that they get the same exact email. Everything's laid out the same way. It's a cut and paste of here's the dates of the tour. Here's what I'm looking for. Any other notes about specific things that we're looking for the tour. And that goes to everybody. So that's a level playing field. So if it comes down to something that's maybe going to be decided by the bid, whatever the lowest number is, management says we're going with the lowest number. Everybody has the same information, the same ability to bid it out. I also try to give the vendors an opportunity to come to me with creative solutions, especially if it's a budget-minded tour. The lighting designer may have said, hey, we want to see this, latest and greatest lighting fixture. And so I'll say to the vendor, like, I would like to see you actually quote it out exactly how I've listed it. But if you have alternate options, some vendors stock different types of lights or different types of this or that, come to me with that solution as well. We can provide it exactly what you're asking for to the letter. And then this is the cost. If you're able to make, an accommodation and use this light instead of this light, we can save you money here. So I always try to encourage that. And that goes back to having relationships with these vendors and knowing that I trust their input, and then I can present that information whether it's me making the decision or to management or business management on what we're going to do. And, here are the options that are being presented to us. So that's kind of my general broad stroke approach.
Just to back up what you were saying there, Zito, in regards of being able to bounce ideas off of your vendors, I'm working towards a drive-in show right now. I've never worked a drive-in show. None of my team have ever worked a drive-in show. And there's an element of stepping into the unknown. So my first call was to my guy at Solotech. And I said, look, hey, I have this show coming up. And before I said anything else, he said, okay, I've had 4 other people speak to me this week. Here's a bunch of research I've done. What do they have on site in terms of audio and video? And here's what you're going to need. And that was just such a easy call. 5 minutes, I had all the information I needed. And you can lean on them as an extra set of expertise, production expertise. These are they know their gear, and the people that are charged with dealing with on the artist side it's just an extra set of production expertise that you can lean on when you need to. Right. So that's a great point to note.
And you can lean on your local PMs too. If, for example, you're not carrying lighting, maybe you're flying, maybe you're on a DJ tour and just traveling in an SUV, and you have to rent a lighting package at every venue. Talk to your local PM. Don't stress out and try to find every production company in every city. Ask your PM to help you source a package, and they know all of the vendors. They know what their room can fit. They know what power is needed. Give them your budget and let them do some of that legwork for you. Yeah,
they're going to find out anyways. This is a small world. Yeah. So you got your information, and you got your vendors, you got your gear lined up. Now let's move in quickly to the to your advanced process.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I try to keep my information clear and concise. There's, Karen will talk a little bit about what from the venue side, what they're looking to see. But what I've learned over the years is that some people may argue this point. I feel like riders are old school and mostly irrelevant to what we're doing. Deals have been struck between the agent and the club, and most of the time everything in the rider is irrelevant anyways. And so I feel like I try to pare down the information to the bare essentials, right, of what they need to know about the tour that's coming in. And so over the years, I've sort of, again, the same thing with my advanced grid, have kind of come up with a format that works for me. And I'll pull it up here. This was from, why does it do? There we go. Okay, so this is from the Steve Aoki tour, club tour we did. I'll just talk through a couple of points. I try to keep it as simple as it is. This isn't a 20-page rider. You have to realize that if you're on tour and you're playing a club like the Stage AE and all these other venues, they're doing 5 or 6 shows a week. The local production rep is on site every day working from whenever that show's load-in is till the end of the night, plus all of their house responsibilities. And so they're busy. They got a lot going on. They aren't going to read through your 30-page rider. And if you come in with this attitude, well, didn't you see page 17, item number 7B? No, they didn't. And it's your responsibility to flag those things that are super important to your show and bring them to the attention of the local. So what I do is I call it a production advance or quick advance. It's a very short document that just gives the broad strokes of what the tour is here. And so I'll just kind of go through this same sort of layout I'll do, whether it's an arena tour or a club tour, a shed tour, same sort of format. And one thing that I do is, as you could see here, this is version 1.3. And I always highlight any changes if I send them out to the club. So when I've set the tour up a few weeks in advance, I'll shoot this out to everybody, say this is a work in progress. Here's version 1.1. So you get a general idea of what we're doing, and I'll update you with changes. And so as I go through and update this document and send it on to folks, the version number will change. And then I highlight cells so they don't have to try to go through my quick advance and figure out what's changed from this version to the previous version. So here we'll talk about, who's on the tour, our tour manager, myself, how many people are there, what we're bringing. We had a front of house and monitor engineer, our lighting designer, stage manager, riggers. So they know the general makeup of the tour. A few important notes. This is where anything that's really pertinent for them. We're carrying CO2, confetti, and cryo, not cry. Can always find mistakes as I look back on stuff. Go through what my power needs are, what my labor requirements are, my schedule. And then this is where I try to make it really simple. For audio, we're providing this, you're providing that, you being the club. We're providing our console floor lighting package, and you're providing all the phone lighting, trussing, and a house desk. Video, we're providing an upstage video wall. Backline, we're providing backline. We're providing all of the risers. I don't need anything from you. Parking here, you can see we had 2 trucks in the tour, so parking for this, parking for the buses, runner needs, broad strokes for catering, dressing rooms, and that's the entire thing. CO2 needs, because we had a lot of cryo and confetti, so that was something that they needed to know. And then again, I try to highlight anything that's really pertinent for the venue. And every show, this is different. On the Steve Aoki tour, if anybody knows him, he has this whole cake me thing where, there's 10 cakes with 30 pounds of confetti, and it's a messy show. So flagging to the locals, this is going to be a mess, and we got to address this. This shouldn't be something that we're thinking about after the fact. Put it on their radar. Don't come in and expect them to know that information. Like I was saying on the Steve Aoki tour, one of the things that was important were these inflatables. So this is just a quick little one sheet that I made sure that information that I flagged for them, showing what we were doing, how we were doing it, so that they could know exactly what we were bringing in, broad strokes on it, and be prepared for us. I didn't need to do a big stage plotter input list because we were carrying all the information. So this is really pared down. This is my rigging plot. really, really pared down to just the pertinent information that they needed to know. And of course, the cake rider, so everybody knows what they need to get for the cakes. And that's the whole thing. So this has all of the broad strokes for the tour, with just the information pertinent to them, no extra BS, and it's not 30 pages of stuff they need to decipher. And if you're the local, the goal was that when they look at the document here, they know exactly what we're doing, exactly what they need to do, and can prepare for the show. And then I'll send this document out and then follow it up with an advanced call where we'll talk through everything point by point, discuss everything, make sure they understand it, finalize the schedule. And then at that point, I would consider the show, show advanced, and we come in and do the thing.
That's amazing.
I want to add another little esoteric side bubble about, we all end up on some tours that go a certain way that ends up being a little more complicated or outside of the box. We have a cake gag. We've got an artist that does X, Y, or Z, and it might be outside of the box, and it might be something that's really downright problematic. We've all ended up, Henry, myself, Zito, Jim, we've all ended up on those kind of tours where you're kind of a rolling 4-alarm fire coming in. That's okay. Work with your partners, just like Matt Schneider, who's out there in the audience with us, and also our friend Bobby Schneider, who we all met a couple of weeks ago. We're all going to say the same thing about all of this. Relationships and communication. You may have a rolling shit show, and that's okay. But you want to get on the phone and say, here we are, we're coming in hot. This anomaly is a thing that happens every day. Let's talk through how we're going to deal with the things that happen every day. The more you're able to get in front of these anomalies, don't be afraid, because it's better that you get in front of the problems that you're going to have than let them sort of, and I know we sometimes have a let it happen and apologize later mentality, or do the thing and apologize afterwards. To some degree, we want to exercise whatever judgment. Just get in front of your difficult advances. Create your relationships. People will appreciate knowing what they have to prepare for than if you surprise them in a way that really hinders their day. Let them know. That way you guys are in the trenches together and you have some teamwork and partnership going on the day when you arrive.
And the same goes for if you're a big production going into a smaller room. If you're touring a theater production and you happen to be doing 1 or 2 clubs, I like to just send out a note saying, hey, we know that we're coming into a smaller room. My team is flexible. We're going to work with you on this. Don't be afraid by looking at my advance. We're not going to come in all guns blazing on this specific show.
Or don't send your arena rider to the 600 club that you're playing.
Right. And listen, if you're like, look, because it's quite possible that you might think you have a couple of days off, but your agent has another idea, and you are somehow doing some renegade club show in the middle of your shed run, and you don't have time to make a club rider. Exit out, and when you do your advance email or your advance call, say, listen, we're only talking about page 7, page 9, and page 6. Let's talk through it in our advance. Here's the whole shebang, but go here. Don't be afraid. We're scaling this way back. And then you'll prepare to do so with your catering. And Karen will chat with us about what happens when you're a shed show or an arena show and you're coming into a club for promo or whatever reason, because that happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Yeah, so we got a lot to cover, so let's get into some basic terminology next. Adrian, if you could bring up the stage directions sheet that you have. We're basically gonna go 101 of 101. As you can see, it's pretty straight. We have stage right, stage left, downstage, upstage are your basic things that you're gonna have to know. If you're standing on stage facing the audience, stage right is going to be your right side, stage left, your left side. Downstage is going to be the edge near the audience. Upstage is going to be the back end. If you've ever been to the Olympia in Dublin or any other old theater, you'll realize the stages used to be raked, and that's where the upstage and downstage comes from. The downhill edge was the downstage. Upstage is the higher edge of the rake. So I think that covers. Then the house, front of house is actually, as it says, the front of house, meaning the non-stage area, the audience area, the house area of it where the audience is, the lobby, that et cetera, et cetera. And get into a few extra terms.
I just want to mention something before
Yes.
we leave directives. Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, your stage left and stage right, when you're in the house, when you're directing people to meet you for after show, for example, you've got to get some guests backstage, you're going to create a meeting point. That meeting point is going to potentially be stage left, house right.
Yeah.
If you tell a patron or a guest to meet you stage left, they will potentially go to their left.
They'll get it wrong anyways, but
right. So just, you have to have yours together, and you have to know what stage left, that stage left means house right, and vice versa. And just be mindful of that when you're directing your guests for the evening.
And a few other terms that we're looking at then, that we'll be discussing when Karen gets into specifics on venues and things you need to know, especially getting into club and theater world. Dead cases, which is basically cases that are empty or cases that you're not using for the show. Dead case storage is where those cases go, whether they be back to your bus and trailer, back to under the stage. You need to know if you have access to them, where they're going to go during the show. If they go back on your truck, wherever it is, it's important that you know ahead of time kind of where that stuff is going to be and what you're doing, because it'll be important. There's always that one case that if the truck goes away and it has to go back on the truck, you're going to need to get that case, and you have to send the runner wherever the truck is and chase the truck down and get in there. And depending where it's buried on the truck, we've all been there with, there's that one piece of gear that got left on the truck in one of the cases, and you have to go find it, and somebody's got to empty the trailer to get it. It's all about communicating, knowing where that stuff is. Curfews, always important to know when the show has to end. A hard curfew means that, and it is very important, whether it be curfew, noise, labor, that when that show has to be over. If it's a soft curfew, it means they suggest it be over at a certain time. If you go over a minute or two, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's just a suggested, that's where things going to end. Hard curfew is a little bit different. It can cost you money. It can be cost you fines. It can be people shutting off. There's people that will shut down we've all seen it happen where audio gets shut down because you cross that line, or it costs you thousands of dollars because you went to labor overtime. So it's always really important to know if it's a hard curfew, soft curfew, and what that means at each venue, what the situation is going to be in those situations. Disco loadout, also important. Again, comes down with your curfews in a lot of cases, because a lot of times, especially in clubs, there's going to be a dance night happening after your show, and and you might be loading, and it might start the minute that you turn on the house lights. The house lights go off, and next thing, music is going on, and you have no way to communicate because it's loud disco stuff. Your radios are useless because you can't hear anything, and there's probably dancers running out on stage while you're trying to load out. So again, really important to know what that is, what that means, what time it starts. Again, it's communication, but if you're in a club, it's always important to ask at any venue, is there anything happening after we're done? Is this it? Is the show done for the night, or is the venue have something else? Places like, Amsterdam, where you have venues that go 24 hours a day and they never stop, and you're coming into something after. So it's always important to know what's happening afterwards, after your show. Tech packet, we've kind of discussed a lot on this, but basically it's the communication that the stuff that you send to the venue with what you need to do the show. I think we've touched base on that a lot. Soft goods, it's backdrops or whatever you're hanging, or whatever you're doing, something you're bringing in that's cloth that you needs to hang or needs to be used for the show. And it can be lots of, but basically it's whatever backdrops, et cetera, et cetera. Now let's get into actually front of house and monitor desk. In the case of audio, front of house is where the sound console goes for the audio for the audience. Monitor engineer is the console used for the band for their audio on stage, and that's usually in the wing, stage right, stage left, depending on what is preferred by the band or whatever is there's room for in the sake of in certain clubs. You may want it to be stage right or stage left, but you may not have the option to go side because there's other stuff on one of the sides. Power. Let's spend a couple of minutes discussing power, and if Zito and Karen could get in that, because power is a really important thing coming in. You have to. There's a lot of information that you could bring into that, but it's pretty critical as to knowing what the venue has and what the touring element has and what they need for what they're doing. And it can be pretty critical, but it's a basic line. If you guys want to touch base on things you've seen on power and just how to communicate that with what your needs are.
Yeah, I think that one of the amateur moves I've seen a few times is a band gets excited about carrying this cool lighting package, and then they want to bring it into the venue, and they're like, we need 15 20 amp circuits to power this thing. And I'm like, you guys need a distro, so don't expect the venue to have 120 amp circuits available to you that are all separate from everything else. They're going to have some for backline, they're going to have some for audio, they may have 5 or 6 available for a ground package, but if you get to a certain point, you're going to have to bring some type of distro, and then you're advancing 3-phase power. So familiarize yourself with how many amps your rig draws. These days everything is LED, no one's bringing dimmers and par cans around with some exceptions. So you'd be hard pressed to pull more than 100 amps on a lighting package in any mid-sized venue right now.
And the easiest way to determine your power needs is just to speak to your lighting department or your vendor. They will know immediately. And if they say, look, you're going to need this, and then you can look at your grid that Zito put together. And if the venues don't have what you need, then you need to carry distro. Simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. That's where the relationship goes. You're not expected to necessarily know all the ins and outs of it. You just need to know what your needs are and work with your production company, your vendors, and they'll be able to tell you, hey, this lighting rig requires 100 amps 3-phase service, or the audio package is 30 amps 3-phase or single phase or whatever it is. They can tell you, and then you can relay the information. Even if you don't specifically know what it is, we could do an hour and a half thing on just about power. Even if you don't specifically understand what it is, at least knowing it and be able to communicate the information. And there's no shame in that. This is what we're carrying. We're carrying a lighting package. The lighting company said that we need 100 amp 3-phase service. You don't need to necessarily know what 100 amp 3-phase service is, but you can still relay that information. You're just the manager of the information at that point.
Yeah, thank you. That's important to know. You're not expected to have a PhD in this stuff, but you have an understanding of what you need and can be able to communicate that, what you need for your show. That is the most important part. One thing Tim Mercer brought up, which I meant to cover on the soft goods, is that soft goods need to have a fire certificate. Most venues, and you shouldn't even hire them. When you buy it, you'll go to a reputable company that will build your soft goods. They will bring you with a certificate of fireproofing, which means it's fire retardant, that it won't start on fire. In some places, you may have to test that. When you're on the East Coast, sometimes they expect to test that or show that. So you just need to have that information and be ready to do that. Like I said, after the Rhode Island thing 20 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago, especially on the East Coast, they're going to ask for that. Somebody's going to ask to see that. Somebody's going to ask to test it. So just be prepared for that, and know and ask any vendor that you're going to do soft goods that is going to provide that, and make sure that they're reputable and that it is fireproof.
when you're getting your soft goods made from the vendor, Bobby just brought this point up, know where you're going with it. If you're using a reputable vendor, they should be asking you, hey, where do you plan on touring with this backdrop? Because the certificates that are required for California or for touring Europe, they're different. It's a different type of certification process, a different type of flame retardant that they use. And so if you're going to be carrying it globally, you know that, and talk over that with your company, and they'll provide you with the right type of material that can be used globally. You don't want to get caught without that. And some places require that information in advance. Boston, anything in Boston, you have to send it to them ahead of time. So that's where having, going back to your production advance in the notes there, hey, we're carrying a backdrop, communicating that to them. Your production rep sees this come through and says, just so you know, 6 weeks out, you need to send the fire certificate and a sample, burn sample to this address so that you can use it, or you can't use it in the show. So again, the onus is on you to relate that information to the locals so that they can help to guide you in the process. You can't be expected to know everything about the local, regulations. So that's where you can really have that partnership with your locals, tell them what we're doing, and they can come back to say, hey, just, if you're doing this, you need to have this, be aware of this.
So I'm going to hop into the local venue type side of things. So Karen, can you talk to us a little bit about what you would like to see?
Yeah, I think I want to echo Zito a bit in having everything be laid out clearly in one email. And honestly, it's better in the body of the email, and it's better if you space it out so whoever you're advancing with on the venue side can respond in line, preferably in another color. And you can get this advance done in 2 emails instead of 20 sometimes, because it's just laid out clearly what you're bringing, what you need from the venue. Generally, it starts off with here's what's coming from us, and then maybe the bottom has like a list of questions, that they need to fill in, like the Wi-Fi password and things like that. But labor, how many hands? Is it a union house? Do we need to have a dark stage? That's something maybe some of you guys will run into around the country. So I think that just trying to keep it as concise and clear, laid out in an email. And if you're a phone person, God help you. If you want to follow up with a phone call, it's always nice to hear someone's voice on the other end of the line, but you need that paper trail. You want to have it. Mark, you're a phone guy.
Love it.
Yeah, and I think something we've talked about is even if you are a phone person or you follow up with a call, still always type a follow-up email.
Right.
So you have a paper trail and you're like, oh, we're on the same page.
But I'm a big advocate of doing the advance on call. I love it. But I obviously do the advance on email. There's a paper trail always, but it is great to do your kind of advance call to kind of run through those points. It's good to kind of run through that. That's just me though.
Yeah, and especially for a bigger production, sometimes you do need to hash some stuff out. I mean, sometimes phone calls are necessary, but they're generally a follow-up to an email. If the phone call is the first thing I get, I then have to type it all up.
But never first.
Everything writing.
Always an email advance first. Then as we get close to the show, then we do an advance call.
It's maybe more old school, kind of like sending the 20-page rider and saying, why didn't you read it? So I think that sort of falls into that category as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the same thing we talked about typing information into cells, calling and having a conversation about the 4 or 5 most important things of the day with the rep that you're coming in to see. It really just says, have you seen it? Do you know that there's no pork on the line? Do you know that we're gonna have a little bit of confetti? Do you know that we need 62 cases of beer? Okay, great. As long as we have the most important stuff laid out, carry on.
If there's something specific, if you're Morrissey and the whole venue needs to be vegetarian, you need to have that phone call and make sure things are sorted. But if not, a lot of it, especially if we're talking here 101, starting out tour managers, chances are it's going to be pretty simple. And you just need to hash out schedule, tech, some loaders, your parking, some basic hospitality, etc. So keep it simple because your venue PM is more likely to actually read everything if it's concise.
And this is where you start creating relationships with your emails and your phone calls. These are the people you're going to start to see every time you hit the road, a couple of times a year maybe. So this is where you start to get your flow together with each of the venues that you go to. So you all are sort of familiar. And when you come in, it's going to be a great day because you're working with Karen.
And a couple of the things you said, Karen, you were talking about like dark stages and crew calls, and that is something that is going to be specific to the venue. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that works and what the terminology is?
So,
how to determine what to request?
You're going to run into some situations where a venue might differentiate a loader versus a stagehand. So some people can only push cases in the truck. Some people can only work on the stage. Sometimes the house engineers are also loaders. Sometimes they are not. So you really want to clarify what your staffing looks like. And especially I would say on the really small scale club level, you might run into some venues that don't have a monitor console or expect the front of house engineer to be mixing monitors from front of house. And your front of house engineer might be kind of disappointed if they don't know that in advance, that they're mixing monitors for the band that night. They might, not staff it the way you would want to see it unless you specify. So keeping track of who exactly does what, who's a loader, who's a pusher, everyone helps. And then also if there's any need to do a dark stage, which is not something we deal with at our venues much, but we like to make sure everyone can walk away to get dinner at some point. So sometimes things shuts down.
And can you talk about what a dark stage is? Is that generally to a time period that nobody can work, or is it because you're breaking the crew? Or
for us, we want to break the crew, but a true dark stage, and really you guys can speak to this better than I can. I think, especially in a union house, means that like literally no one can touch anything for an hour.
Yeah, nobody on stage at all. It's dark.
Dark. Literally dark stage, right? Yeah. So we don't have that type of restriction, but we just like to make sure our crew gets a chance to walk away and eat. And eating is another thing. Are you responsible for feeding the local crew? Is that coming out of your catering budget, or is that separate? So these are all important things to ask before you get hit with a $200 crew dinner that you weren't expecting.
And as far as union crews, do you feel comfortable touching on that, or maybe that's
probably someone else? We're not a union crew. I've certainly worked with plenty of union crews over the year, but maybe would, or you guys would have more.
Yeah. Zito, do you want to touch on that? Just the basics of what people can expect if they hear this is a union house. Like, what are the very basic things they can expect to have to keep in mind?
Sure. Really broad strokes. The first thing, and probably the most important thing, are going to be minimums. Most union houses have regulations on the number of hands you have to have on a call. Some of them are based upon how many trucks you have, how many buses, that sort of thing. Secondly, you're going to pay them for a certain amount of time, regardless of how much time they work. So that's really important. A lot of them will be, majority of union houses are 5-hour minimums. So you're going to pay whatever the labor call is, the 10 hands, the 12 hands, the 75 hands, whatever your call is, for those 5 hours, regardless of whether they work 1 hour, 3 hours, or whatever. So that's kind of the broad stroke. And they have minimums for load in and load out. So it's a 5-hour in and a 4-hour out. And so that helps you in sort of laying your schedule out for the day and knowing, okay, when do we want to have the stagehands come back? Our loadout takes 3 hours. Let's bring them back 30 minutes early so everybody's standing by. They're on a 4-hour minimum. So kind of managing how it works there. That's one of the big broad strokes. The second thing is most unions have regulations as far as breaks. Actually, I would say pretty much everyone, you have to break the stagehands at specific intervals of times. Should always do that, regardless of a union house or non-union house. Work in breaks, take care of your locals, respect them, treat them with respect. And so there's guidelines, and your local will talk you through that. They're on a 5-hour minimum. You need to break them at 10 o'clock. That's kind of the big thing. The other kind of other things to note will be, some of them will have regulations on how many hands you have to keep on all day. If you're in the building, you may have to pay for 4 folks the entire day, regardless, as long as you're in the building, or 10 department heads or whatever it is. And again, your local promoter rep will talk you through that. And then you get into some of the bigger union houses on the East Coast a lot, specifically along the East Coast, where they're going to be departmentalized, and you have to they'll ask you, how many trucks of lighting do you have? You have 5 trucks of lighting. Okay, so you're going to need to have 12 dedicated lighting hands, and you're going to need to have 4 dedicated hands for staging and maybe 6 for audio. So, and they only do those purposes. An audio hand is only an audio hand, and a lighting hand is only a lighting hand. So those are kind of the broad strokes. Every other one will get in. And I guess one other note is most of the union houses will have a stagehand is different from a loader. A loader would literally works within the truck itself. They load and unload the equipment on and off the truck. Most of them do not leave the truck. They are in the truck themselves, and a stagehand will take the equipment either from the truck to the stage and work outside of the truck. Some union houses even have restrictions where a stagehand can only push the equipment up to the truck, and the loaders then will take it from that position onto the truck. The stagehands can't go in the truck and vice versa. Again,
sometimes they're different unions also. Sometimes you're dealing with multiple unions in the same house.
In New York, yeah, there'll be multiple unions. Play Madison Square Garden. You can have up to 5 unions working your show. And typically it's kind of 2. There's usually Teamsters, which are the loaders, and IATSE, which are the stagehands. That's the typical sort of scenario.
I feel like you're looking at specifics, really. It's just like each person is assigned, and to the T, you have to follow within these regulations, and they follow a full system versus a non-unionized house where there is more flexibility, and these hands have more open options to help you and assist with your show in a nutshell.
Yep.
Hey, Karen, so say somebody is coming into the Fox Theater or the Boulder Theater, what can they do? What can their tour do to make it easier for your local crew? And what can make it, how should they interact on that day with your local crew?
Communication is the most important thing. So just being prepared. If we're prepared, then we can handle anything. And then we're maybe just putting out little fires. And an amp doesn't work, and we need to help source an amp locally for that. Something along those lines, finding a runner to go run a quick errand. So if we just have everything sorted out in advance ahead of time, and it hasn't been pulling teeth to try to get that information, then we have a good show. It's rare that we, have a crisis come up. I think, in our venues, if we can go back to the scaling discussion, we are 30 minutes from Red Rocks. So let me say that we a lot of these side underplays, Red Rocks tie-in shows. They play Red Rocks one night, and then they play the Fox, which is a 700 cap venue. So then we are becoming experts at just shoehorning huge rigs into these small venues, which is fun, but also sometimes it blows my mind how much gear we're trying to squeeze into a small venue. So if you are on one of those tours that is a larger production and then playing smaller venues, think about your B and your C plan. Think about how you packed your semi that night for the next day, and that we don't have to unload 20 feet of lighting on the tail of the truck just to get to the stuff that needs to come in.
Great point. Yeah.
Really good point.
That's great.
Go ahead, Mark.
While we've got the conversation going, I'd love to jump into the conversation of fly dates. What if your tour is, you got multiple buses, and then you're with an artist that has some dates in between, and you have to fly? Like, how do you navigate that? Whether it's vanting backline with your venue and doing your due diligence to find out if you're paying for it, local gear, etc. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Zito, on going into a fly date, and hearing how y'all navigate that if an artist is flying in.
While it's different for everybody, of course. Every sort of scenario is different, but it kind of is the same process. It's identifying what your needs are, and then looking at what the logistics of the show are. Okay, so we're flying in. We can't get our gear there, so we need to know we're going to get backline from our locals, and we're going to need all audio. And at this point, it's really important for you. Again, this goes back to my earlier comment. If there's something that's absolutely integral to your show, you have to find a way to carry it. And in your position, whether you're a tour manager or production manager, and you're representing the artist, if you can't be flexible about something, then that responsibility is on you. You can't expect when you're going to do a show somewhere in South America that get upset because they can't find this specific piece of gear you have. If it is that integral to your show, you have to carry it. So it's the same process. It's about identifying what your needs are and clearly communicating that with the locals, and then working through it. You have to be understanding. You have to be able to go through the process with them of making compromises. This is our backline list, for example, would have a first choice, second choice, third choice option. And that's how most backline riders are laid out. This is what our guitar player would love to see for their amp. But if you can't find this, then you can find this. And then if that's not an option, then we will make this work. So you give them 3 options. You can't just say one option, it's this or nothing. And the more generic you can make your needs, the easier it is to replicate them. If you know you're only doing fly dates, let's say for a guitar player, you can find a twin reverb amp almost anywhere in the world. So when you're having a conversation with your guitar player about what his amp is, I always say, you can spec this boutique amp and you're going to get it 1 out of 10 times. I would rather have consistency and knowing that we're going to get the same amplifier 10 times out of 10 or 9 times out of 10. And so that's kind of my general approach. Something super specific, maybe we'll carry a snare drum, carry a couple of the microphones that we need. And then everything else, I try to make it as generic as possible so that I know it's the same thing, that we're getting the same stuff everywhere. You may not be able to carry a drum set, but you can carry drum heads. If your drummer has a specific sound that they want, carry the drum heads. That's easy. That can go into a little flight case, and then you can pretty much take any crappy drum kit around the world and make it usable. Yeah. One of the things we found is that those types of things aren't maintained around the world. You get to places in Eastern Europe or South America, and they don't have the resources to change drum heads between every show or change strings on the guitar. So we're not carrying our bass guitar, but we can carry some strings and a couple of parts that we need to fix something. We can carry our pedals, or we can carry our drum heads, those types of things, and give yourself the tools to at least try to succeed in those fly date situations. Just try to be articulate in your needs. Make sure you're dealing with language barriers. You can be dealing with a lot of variables. So try to be very articulate and very simple in what you're asking of others so that they can understand the information. And pictures work wonders, especially if there's something unusual about how you're doing something or your setup. Send a picture, put a picture in there. This is we had a drummer that had to have a taller hi-hat rod because he would mount a tambourine at the top. So take a picture of it. This is what we're looking for. Can you try to find this for us? Don't expect that somebody is going to understand maybe the terminology. They can be dealing with a lot of stuff. Or you're doing a festival and they have 30 different artists they're trying to manage it for. So try to be articulate and flag the really important things.
That's really great points. What if you need all of your backline rented to go into show? Karen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of relationships and working with your venue PMs to get the best production for your show and kind of navigating that process.
Yeah, I think I touched on that earlier a little bit about leaning on your venue PMs to get you the best deals so that you're not scrambling. Like it always, the few times a year a band says, oh, we rented some backline from this company. And I was like, why would you not have just come to me to help you get that? Because we can get better deals. We work with them constantly. They're here the night before and the night after, and we could have left some of the gear in place. So start with your local contact for those kinds of things because they have good relationships. We have a great backline vendor, and I know that if he sees a rider and there's some things he can't provide, he's going to just call the tour manager directly and have that conversation. And it's not going to be me being the middleman the whole time too. So it will be sorted and organized, and the right gear will show up because I trust this vendor to do a good job. So know that your local PMs have trusted vendors they work with. They're trusted for a reason, and start with them for advice on who to talk to. And same with the lighting packages. There might be some great lighting companies that you know about, but maybe they're not the best fit if you have a $1,200 budget for your ground package. And maybe your PM knows a guy who does a great $1,200, lighting package for your show.
Yeah, that's great. And we can't emphasize enough the importance of relationships that we've been talking about throughout all of our webinars. And always just make sure you go through the people that are part of the show. You know, they're here to help us. We're all kind of in this circle of life. So make sure you're going through the people that are part of the show to kind of make sure that you're checking all your checklist off properly.
Yeah, we've touched on this in a couple of episodes. How the process differs if you are a support artist on somebody else's tour, and again the process differs, and again how you prepare for a tour, how you advance a tour is completely different and dictated to by somebody else. So I wanted to just quickly touch upon that. If you watched our security topic last week, and before that in a couple of other, like the advancing session, some of the similar rules and approaches apply for production. You know, first port of call, if you've been booked to open up for an artist in a theater tour or an arena tour, your first port of call is going to be to discuss with your management or your agent as to what has been discussed for production. Because what should have been discussed is what broad strokes we're talking here. You might be 2 months out from the tour, but there might be a designation that there's no production allocation for the opener, that you're not allowed to carry any production at all. You may have a very small, especially if you're in a smaller tour, club tour, theater tour, you may have a very small stage footprint to work in. Say the headliner has a very involved production, they take up a large footprint on stage and they can't move a lot of their gear. Then you, as the opening act, are just going to have to kind of fit around their setup. You know, if you've been to see a show and you've seen the opening act play in, you know, 4 guys in a tight little circle in the center stage while there's all these drapes all over this massive stage. And if you've ever wondered why that is, it's for that reason. It's simply not practical for the headliner to move a bunch of their production to accommodate the opening act, so that, you know, you kind of get what you're given. And that's how you're going to approach production for the most part as an opening act. So check in with your management, check in with your agent. If they're not giving you any information, or nothing's really been set in stone, which is fairly common, your next port of call is going to be the headline TM. And you want to open up dialogue with them, see what their production's looking like, and just trying to get a sense for what you will be allowed to bring on the tour. And that will give you a great jumping off point. If you're with a reasonably well-known artist opening on an arena tour, you might be afforded more space, more production allowances, and they might let you get a bit more creative. So, and that's certainly a thing, you know, on a lot of arena tours, you will have an artist who is pretty well known and can drive a decent amount of tickets on their own in each market as the direct support. So there is you have a certain degree of license in some situations. So the spectrum of what you may be able to achieve production wise is pretty wide in that context. So you want to find out what you can do, and then you can start on budgeting it. If your artist has no budget, then you're back to square one. If there's a decent budget for production in there, and the headliner is cutting you off at every avenue, then again, you're pretty much going with a basic setup. But let's say they have a pretty open book in terms of production. You can then start working with your production designer, if you have one, or with your lighting department, your video, whatever it is, to create a production that's going to fit within the time scale and the production parameters that have been laid out by the headliner. There's no point turning up with something that's going to take you hours and hours to set up and change over when you're given an hour on deck to set up and sound check your artist. So be realistic, try and be as flexible and as adaptable, and show that to the headline TM and PM. If you can show that you're thinking about this, and they may give you a bit more license and may be more willing to come and go with you. So that's important. Again, we've stressed it in almost every session. Create a good first impression, and you may get a little bit more moving forward. And typically, you're going to advance if you're on a reasonable size tour, you're going to advance the tour with the headliner. So you want to have all your documents compiled and finalized, or within a 1 degree percentage point of finalized, because you can't go and send 5 different versions of your rider to the headliner. That's gonna piss them off straight away. So get your house in order, send all your documents over to the headliner, and then hopefully they will advance your technical requirements, your production requirements, along with the tours as a package. And as we've said before, do not circumvent the headliner and go straight to the promoter. That's not going to fly. So for them, that's going to give them an idea of what you're bringing, what they need to accommodate, how your package is going to fit with their package, and what they might need extra to accommodate you as the opening act. Another point that I want to touch on is crew. Get an idea if you're opening for an artist, especially on an arena tour where things are less, let's say you're in a club or a theater, there's a lot more of just the house crew being the house crew, and they will come and go, and they'll help you out here and there, and they'll maybe stray outside of their zone, their area of expertise to help the tour. Or, once you get into an arena show, the headline tour takes so much of the crewing responsibility onto their side. So you will find that there isn't a ton of auxiliary staff from the venue, and you may get into a situation where you turn up and you've got a backdrop. Whose responsibility is it to fly the backdrop? If it hasn't been discussed with the headline tour manager, the production manager, and you might just be a TM, a front of house, and a monitor engineer, who's going to put your backdrop up? There's a conversation to be had there, because the headline carps may take, the stage manager might be amazing and just say, hey, look, we've got it, don't worry about it. But that may not happen. Their entire crew is going to be exceptionally busy, involved in their show. They're not thinking about your backdrop. So unless you approach it proactively and ask the headline tour, we're carrying a backdrop. Is there somebody in your team who can look after it? Or we are not traveling with a monitor engineer. Who, can we employ somebody from is there an assistant monitor tech, your monitor number 2? Can we hire him to mix monitors for us? Because don't assume that there will be a house tech to look after you. And that really becomes an issue at the arena level. And you might be faced with a situation where somebody approaches you and asks to be tipped out for doing something. And that's really something that kind of gets really murky, and I don't want to go into it too much. But ultimately, if it's a conversation you've had with the headline production manager in advance, they will have said, hey, okay, well, our monitor number 2 is going to mix mons for you for X per day. And you're going to have to go back to management and say, look, this is what it's going to cost us if we use this guy from the tour, but here's what it would cost for us to hire somebody of our own, plus hotels, plus an extra bunk on the bus, plus PDs, plus all of this. So if you're just starting out, budget's tight, it makes a lot of sense to try and go down that route and hire somebody from the headlines crew if you can, and it could end up saving you a lot of money across a tour. And quickly, because I know we're running tight on time, to that point, an extension of that point is oftentimes on a large production, they might be traveling with multiple trucks. And if you're in a bus and trailer or just a bus, you might be hurting for space, weight, etc. It's okay to have a conversation with the headlines tour and ask them if they may end up having some spare truck space for you to carry some of your production. If they're touring with 20 trucks, they might have a half a truck or a third of a truck spare once they've done their pack. And if it could be the difference between you carrying that lighting console that you were hoping to, or, you know, the floor package element that you were hoping to carry. So that's definitely not a taboo subject. It's something that you can discuss with the headline TM, PM.
Doug, I almost prefer it, man. Like, honestly, if I can take the support production into my trucks, it makes the day way easier than having to send, you know, stagehands all the way out to that bus and trailer that's parked a few blocks away, or having to park the support act right up front and potentially lose a prime spot for my artist because they have a trailer when I could have just carried their gear in my truck. It's so much simpler. I prefer and think that is the new way of doing things, that the headliners are getting involved as early as they can with the support acts, because I love to know where they're going with the design early on, because you know, it's not going to affect my design, but I know I'm going to have to deal with it. So I'd rather get in front of it and help them and help them make sure that they've thought of the things that they didn't, you know, they may have missed, or and also, yeah, hire as many of my crew as you can to help you get this done, because, you know, the crew guys love to, you know, make an extra $100 or whatever a show, and it saves me having to bump my numbers up in catering, and saves you thousands of dollars as in hotels and flights and per diem. So it's a very common practice once you get to that arena level. So yeah, don't be afraid to try it. It's not taboo at all.
To Henry's point, most stage managers and production managers these days would rather have their hands on your bit of gear than wait for your trucks to dump your stuff and create a pile somewhere. It just gets into the show flow better if the opener's gear somehow ends up rolled into ours and it's all coming and going, not as little tiny separate units, but as one big organized unit.
And it expedites the loadout also.
Yeah.
Indeed, which we're all always trying to do.
Absolutely.
So we're going to throw it to 5-1 on mentorship, huh?
So Karen and Zito, I'll ask you both this question, but I'll start with ladies first with Karen. So when you guys were just starting out, who were your mentors, and are they still your mentors today? And what kind of things did you lean on them as mentors when you were first starting out?
When I was first starting out, I actually started as an intern at the Fox Theater 20 years ago. And so really all the engineers and staff that worked there mentored me. And then ultimately, you know, I worked for a big PA company, and I maybe referred to them as my tour mentors, but it was definitely a trial by fire and a lot of hard work. But it made me, you know, a good tech and a good, ultimately, production manager to have that kind of mentorship. So, you know, I think we run an internship program at our venues, and I always tell the interns, like when they're starting to get towards the end of their 6-month internship and want to really focus on lighting or audio, I always tell them, like, you know, find the engineer or the LD that you really connect with, that you seem to work well with, and sign up for their shows and start working alongside them. So, you know, find the person you have the rapport with and see if they'll mentor you, because not everyone has that relationship.
So who were some of your mentors though?
By name.
Yes.
So, you know, when I first started out at the Fox, some of the senior engineers, some of whom are still around, like Rob Kurtz and Jay Saylor and Dave Miller. And then I started working for Brett Dowlin, which at the time was Dowlin Sound, long before it became DSI Events and then other things. At the time, it was a small company. It was Brett and Matt Jones and a few other people there. And yeah, they just tortured me for years, but it was good. It was really important.
But it was a good torture.
It was the good kind of torture. It hurt so good. It was definitely grueling, and I got made fun of a lot, but it was important. And I feel like I got opportunities that I would not have gotten otherwise because of them. And yeah, and they sort of shaped who I am as a tech.
And what about you, Zito?
You know, for me, the process of learning and mentorship should be continual. I am a firm believer in constantly learning and improving. You know, one thing I want to encourage, especially our younger folks, I learned a lot, especially through the earlier parts of my career when I worked for support acts, by being a support act. You are essentially given an opportunity when you're on tour with a larger act to learn, to watch, to observe. I found myself coming in at the beginning of their load-in and watching how they did things, learning from their crew, asking questions. And I found that they were eager to share and respected me for doing that. I learned so much in those parts of my career, not only of how I wanted to do things, but how I didn't want to do things. Maybe a way that somebody operated that I didn't agree with sort of their approach. I said, you know, this isn't the approach that I want to take. And I learned both ways on viewing how I want to do something and how I don't want to do something. I can't encourage young folks, younger people, and even still now, there is times where we won't be working for the headliner on a festival, or we might be doing some support date appearances. We did One Republic did some dates with U2. There's a hell of a lot of stuff I can learn from from those folks and what they're doing. And I'm never afraid. I know what I don't know. And I know that I want to continually keep learning, and I want to ask questions. And I found that most people respect that. They respect you more for asking questions and not coming in with the attitude of, I know everything and I have it figured out. But if you approach it in a way of wanting to learn from those around you, you're going to go far. And I've taken that approach into how I build my teams. I've noticed, I'm 41 years old. I've been lucky enough to work for some really cool artists over the years and some large scale touring. And there was a point where I would have been threatened by bringing people around me that maybe were more experienced. But what I learned is that the team builds you up. I try to build a team of the best possible people that I can. I want to have the best in each department, and I rely on them. I'm a production manager. I manage the overall production, but I can't be expected to know the intricacies of every last detail of rigging or lighting or video or audio, especially with evolving technology. And so I build a team that I can ask questions to. I can go to my stage manager and have a dialogue. And I'm not threatened by the fact that maybe my rigger has done this venue before and I haven't been there. That's an asset to me. It's an asset to have those people around me. And so that is my general approach really in life, and to be able to constantly keep learning, glean information. Even on a tour I did last fall, we had I was out with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I wasn't production manager, as part of the team there. And they have massive pyro, and there was new effects. I had nothing to do with pyro on that tour, but I went and asked the crew chief, show me your stuff. Show me what you're doing. Why are you doing this? Teach me this. And in different departments they're doing, we had a Tesla coil. Never seen one before. Great opportunity to learn. Talk to the tech. Teach me about it. I had nothing to do with the Tesla coil, but it was an opportunity for me to glean information and learn. I have people in my life that I look up to, that I respect, other production managers that I'll call if I'm going to a place I've never been before. Jimmy Petnato is one of my great friends and dear mentors. Omar Abdurrahman is another one. Those guys have seen it and done it, and there's no shame. I've been hired to do the job, and there's no shame in me reaching out to someone and say, hey, I'm going through this, or we're dealing with this, or I'm headed to this place. Talk me through. I saw you guys just played there, or, is there anything that I should be aware of? That will get you a lot further than, having ego and attitude. And that's sort of my general overall approach.
And I just wanted to quickly expand on that. Us as tour managers, when we're on the road, we notice the venues that do things right. Places like the Fox in Boulder, 930 Club, the Van Buren in Phoenix. Those venues stand out because they're doing great things with their local crew. And if you're working in-house at a venue and you're doing a great job, sooner or later, and if your goal is to get on the road, sooner or later you will be noticed. Artists come through venues all the time and pick up crew from wherever it may be. you might work with a local monitor engineer that you really vibe with, and hey, what are you doing next month? We have a tour going out. That's probably one of the most common places that people start in this industry. So if you're working in a venue, keep your standards high, and if your aim is to get on the road, it'll happen sooner or later. A tour will notice the hard work that you're putting in.
One more thing to add to that. I'm just going to say, don't be an asshole. A lot of times us as touring folks come through and we're working for the big bad headliner and we're going to come into this venue and we're going to get everything we want. That doesn't get you anywhere. It's the same thing about the relationships with the vendors. You build relationships with the locals, with the local promoters. I tell tours, I'm not going to come in and act like this. I'm not going to bully our way through this venue because I'm working for X artist. I'm going to come through here 3 different times this year, 4 different times this year with 4 different artists. And I may not necessarily get along with that person, or it might be a challenging day, but I still have to treat them with respect, because the next time I come through, I got to work with them again and again and again. And that approach will get you a lot further than just coming in and thinking you're the shit.
And likewise on the venue side, I have a policy that I never say no for the sake of saying no. If a tour manager or production manager asks me for something, I'm always going to try to make it happen. I'm not going to just say no. That's not what we agreed to. That's not what we discussed. Like, we're going to try to have a great show. There's no need to say no unless it's dangerous. So overwhelmingly, all of the people who come through are professional, kind, polite. Everyone has a good day.
So Karen, can you tell us about your mentorship program?
Sure.
And I have one last question for you. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead with the first one.
So our internship program at Zito, and that encompasses the Fox Theater, which is about a 700 cap venue, and the Boulder Theater, which is 1,200 cap theater. So we get a huge variety of shows through. And our internship program is about 6 months. We start 3 times a year with groups of around 10 to 12 people, and they work 2 nights a week. So they do the shows from start to finish, load in to load out. They sign themselves up for 2 shows a week they want to work. So they end up working about 50 shows over the course of the program. And then in addition to that, we do workshops and seminars and things like that they get to participate in. I pay my engineers to teach a class on mixing, and I pay an LD to teach a class on lighting. So they get a little bit of that extra classroom time as well. And then really by the end of it, they start to do some shadowing, some reverse shadowing where they are effectively the LD on the show, but our LD is still there to keep an eye on them. So it's a sort of safe way to integrate them. And eventually they can start working shifts if I have room. And often they end up on major tours, either, low level positions on huge tours or, bigger positions on smaller tours. I get calls weekly, not these days, but usually I get calls weekly from agents, managers, asking about if I have somebody to send on a tour. So we put a lot of them on the road, and we can stand behind them because we've vetted them and we know that they're good, that we've trained them the way we like to do things. And then generally they're successful.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah. Do we have any questions? Do you want to take any? Does anybody see any questions that they want to address?
I just wanted to say, I love that you do that program so much, and I hope that more venues can start doing that. It's definitely the best way to do it. Next time I come through, I'd like to reverse shadow somebody to be tour manager for the day or something. So
that's a great idea. We should totally start offering that.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Do we see any?
I'm not looking at one specific question, but there have been a couple across the piece that have alluded to the sort of timeline of when you would cover production management roles as a tour manager and when you might hire a production manager. And as we've said with most of this, there's no hard and fast rules. There's no set time that you hire a PM. We've also all seen every different iteration of crew wearing the PM hat, TM PM or front of house PM, monitor PM, stage manager PM, and sometimes you share the duties between yourselves. whatever works for what you need to get your production on the road, if you are not in a budgetary position to hire a standalone production manager, there certainly becomes a point where it becomes untenable to not have a production manager when things get too complicated, the venue's sizes increase. You know, if you're doing an arena without a production manager, something's gone wildly wrong along the line. But I've seen artists that you may be surprised, very surprised to see that they don't have a standalone production manager, and might be that the front house covers it because he's really, really fucking good at his job and has always done it. So there really are no hard and fast rules. But the big thing to take from this, and people have mentioned it all the way through this, is you're not expected to be an expert in every field of the technical aspects that go on tour. Your job is manager, and your role is to take the key information from each department and organize it and send it out. You know, if you're a tour manager doubling as a PM, you're never going to be able to learn each individual area to the level that, you know, a light guy or a video guy has or does. So yeah.
So I see a good question from Nora Castaneda. She was asking if there's any good books out there that anyone can recommend for starters. Anyone have any book recommendations? Zito, anything you've got on top of that?
Seems like maybe we should write one.
Isn't that why we're doing this webinar series? Because there is very little learning resource for this industry.
Yeah. I do think, Doug, to add to your what you were just talking about there, a sort of a guideline, because I've done dual roles. You know, I've done tour manager, production manager, front of house, tour manager, stage manager, you know, whatever. That's very common. I think you have to trust your gut instinct and go when you realize that you can't do both jobs well, when stuff starts slipping because you're spread too thin. That's the time to say, I need to pick one. You need to have a conversation with management or whoever has hired you and say, listen, it's too much at this point. I can't get to everything in the day, and things are starting to get missed, or, you know, I'm dropping the ball. And the same thing, you know, there's no shame in having the conversations of saying, I'm willing to take this thing on, but this isn't my expertise. I'm not a, you know, lighting person. All the extent of what I can do is hand this off. I've, as a production manager, been handed wardrobe. I'm not a wardrobe person. So I said, this is what I'm willing to do. I can hand this off to a local and say, this is our clothes. You need to do whatever you need to do with them, clean them or steam them or whatever. But I'm not going to be able to fix them or, you know, fix issues. So you just got to trust your gut and don't be afraid to speak up and flag those things, you know, have those conversations with management, be honest, and say, I'm willing to tackle this. This isn't, you know, this might be too much, but let's give it a shot and we can revisit at the end of the month or the end of the tour or whatever.
Just because you can physically or mentally, you're capable of doing 3 or 4 jobs on a tour doesn't mean that that's the right way to go. It sets precedent, and you end up in a hole that you can't get out of. So before we wrap for the day,
had something to share, Adrian?
Something to share. Hold on, I'm trying. Mark, you do it.
Okay, yeah, let me see if I can pull it up here. Let's see if I make sure I got the screen up. 1 second, it is up there. Give me 1 second. All right.
Screen sharing.
I'm gonna go to share screen. Here we are. All right. Can you see it?
No.
No.
There you go.
There you go.
Hey.
So I wanted to take a moment to wish
5-1.
our colleague 5-1 a happy birthday tomorrow. Since we won't be able to throw you a virtual party tomorrow, we're throwing you a virtual birthday party right now. Happy birthday, our beloved 5-1.
Happy birthday, 5-1.
Yeah,
Finally turning 26.
you're no longer a young gun.
We just wanted to wish you a happy birthday, 5-1, and we hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow.
I will.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Zito, Karen, you guys have been amazing. Thank you so much. This episode turned out so good. We covered so much information. I hope you guys loved it too. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday. We're going to be doing a great conversation with Rob Hallett from Live Nation UK. And we've got more in store, but have a great week, everybody. Enjoy your quarantine.
Thanks, guys.
See you on Thursday.
Okay.